All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're taking on the role of an observant chronicler to witness the utter decay of dark Camelot into the permanent night. This isn't your standard upbeat tale of shining armor and golden grails. No, we're looking at a massive, psychological fortress of the mind, a whole realm completely weighed down by its own cascading failures. The architects of this kingdom? They looked straight into the abyss, and, well, they blinked. So, let's track the mythic villain journey of the Crow, the roaming zeitgeist of this dark era, and navigate through the wreckage.
Think of it from the perspective of a wandering spirit. The Crow's detached consciousness just sat back and watched it all unfold. It watched the Silver Wolf, who really represents any lone traveler of the psyche, approach the hollow throne. They wander into this thick air smelling of rusted iron and forgotten prayers, desperately seeking some kind of light in a famously vacant realm. But the thing is, the higher men who built Camelot had already cracked under the spiritual weight of the void. They didn't leave behind a utopia. They left behind a psychological labyrinth of their own extremes.
And you really see that extreme fracture when you compare Camelot's broken architects. Over at the Iron Bridge, you've got the Pale Inquisitor, completely weighed down by silver guilt and enforcing this freezing, necrotic morality. To him, perfect stasis is the only answer. Movement itself is basically a sin. But then, if you somehow survive his self-loathing, you hit the last thinker in the glass library. This guy views the messy energy of life as a literal contagion. Instead of guiding you, he wants to clinically delete life's noise, bottling up your very heartbeat into a sterile archive just to peacefully curate extinction.
Now, if you try fleeing that cold, sterile logic, you almost invariably stumble into the uncanny wood, right into the domain of the tarantula preacher. This Black Knight has completely tossed out all heraldry. He's a spirit of gravity, pulling the mind straight down into the dirt. He takes the majestic round table and reduces it to a mere gathering circle for prey, wholly embracing what he calls the uncanny law of the predator. Basically, consume others before you get consumed yourself.
Okay, so here is where the Crow completely flips the script. Unlike the Pale Inquisitor enforcing his rigid stasis or the last thinker trying to archive extinction, the Crow doesn't seek to rule at all. It is a detached, observing consciousness. And honestly, the sheer psychological weight of that detached observation is terrifying. It doesn't interfere, it just passively feasts on their mounting failures. It sits in the shadows of the permanent night, gathering up the cynical knowledge of those broken higher men like black grain, just waiting for the burden of their despair to hit critical mass.
So what happens when a traveler actually reaches the center of this dark round table? They hit the ultimate crushing realization. The Grail is utterly empty. Look at what they're flanked by: guilt, logic, and revenge. The higher men have failed on every conceivable level. In this pivotal moment, rather than just giving up, the true seeker has to perform the grave dance right on top of the ruins of these necrotic extremes. They literally have to choose to create their own meaning out of the spiritual wreckage.
Which brings us to a terrifying crossroads, because out of the deepest thickets of the uncanny woods steps the Violet Knight, and let me tell you, he is not here to offer comfort to a hollow traveler. Instead, he raises a weapon that shimmers with this strange, bruised light. So what actually happens when the ultimate psychological verdict is struck?
Well, that plays out in the parable of the bruised verdict. The Violet Knight raises this bruised light gavel, which possesses its own mythic intelligence. It literally expands in size to perfectly match the immense spiritual weight of the seeker's own despair. When that gavel strikes, it's not a physical death. It's a violent, terrifying psychological execution. It violently jolts the psyche out of its secret shame and sterile logic, abruptly ending all that passive decay and triggering an agonizing evolution.
And as that heavy gavel falls, it forces a massive, violent fork in the road. You are left with a fundamental choice amidst the spiritual wreckage. Do you completely submit to the verdict and regress into feral instinct? Or do you refuse the frozen stasis of the Iron Bridge and somehow find a way to burn with the active force of nature?
Let's look at the first outcome in the parable of the Crush Gods. Here, the gavel's strike violently crushes together the broken gods of the state: memory, reason, and will. It takes the inner critic of the Pale Inquisitor, mashes it with the detached intellect of the last thinker, and forces them into a grotesque union with the tarantula preacher's bitter malice. The result? Total regression of body and mind. The seeker morphs into a man-beast, synthesizing Faustian intellectual despair directly with feral survival. When thinking fails, a savage, new purpose just crawls right out of the ruins.
But wait, there's a totally different path outlined in the parable of the swamp fire. For those who outright refuse the freezing stasis of the Inquisitor,
That terrifying blow from the gavel acts as a catalyst. It forces them into a bond with verdant life, a mythic nature spirit. It allows them to create their own burning light in the pitch black. It is a fiercely active, living response to the void.
I mean, think about it. If the throne is famously vacant, you can't just sit around in the dark waiting for a new king. You have to become the very force of nature that overtakes the castle. Instead of regressing, the Seeker transforms into a living pillar of growth. They prove that the spirit can actually consume the ruins of Gark Camelot to fuel its own swamp fire.
Now, while this agonizing evolution is happening all over, the time of the Black Harvest is ripening. The permanent night settles incredibly heavily over the Glass Library and the Iron Bridge. Those broken hiremen just endlessly, obsessively analyze the wreckage. But remember the Crow. It's been watching. All this constant, sterile, cynical analysis does absolutely nothing but saturate the Earth with negative psychic energy. The whole realm's psyche just becomes bloated and unimaginably heavy with its own cascading failures.
You can literally feel the tension reaching a critical breaking point. There is so much mass to this psychological despair that it can no longer be contained just within the mind. The very barrier between metaphor and physical reality simply snaps under the immense spiritual weight.
And this is the terrifying climax. Feeding on that broken reality, the zeitgeist finally sheds its detached observance. All that negative psychic energy it gathered from the architect's failures allows the bird to literally take on flesh, revealing its terrifying secondary form, the Crow of Great Evening. It is the physical, living manifestation of the absolute collapse of Camelot's intellect and morality. The era of passive observation is over. The Great Evening has arrived.
So, as an observant chronicler of all this, I'll leave you with this final, provocative thought for your own journey through the psychological ruins. When the structures of your mind completely fail and you find the throne of your own purpose vacant, whose survival path are you going to choose? Are you going to regress into the savage ruins? Will you succumb to the black harvest of the Great Evening? Or will you find a way to burn as the swamp fire? Keep questioning the ruins, my friends.